didn't go before.
Oh, you still have
No.
They went yesterday.
No,
Wait, we practiced 2 days ago.
Wait, what's that? They practiced us.
Okay. The Habeas Corpus Suspension Act, 1863, by Drew Steffens
And Nikki Page.
Alright, so what was the Habeas Corpus Suspension Act? Well, the Habeas Corpus Suspension Act was actually a writ issued by the court that said anybody in custody should be brought forth to a court and have trial, and there they would determine whether there was a detention or a penalty, or if there was not. And also, in quote, the writ of habeas corpus is an English origin. The purpose was to liberate illegally detained people and still protects against arbitrary imprisonment. And at this time, in 1863, the Civil War was going on, and the president was Abraham Lincoln.
Is there any way we could get rid of that, or we just leave it? Alright. So, sounds pretty good, right? So why did Abraham Lincoln suspend it? So at the time, the Civil War was going on, and Abraham Lincoln was trying to do the best for the Union. And there were a lot of Southerners and Confederate people that were getting locked up, and they would just take a long time, and there would be a lot of people that would be let go. So Abraham Lincoln just suspended habeas corpus altogether. And the state legislative from Maryland, he was arrested, and his attorney asked for a writ of habeas corpus, and then Abraham Lincoln just said, no, you're just getting locked up. And so by this he could hold Confederate leaders and supporters and not give them right to habeas corpus. And so some of the amendments that were violated, the fifth one, which was the due process of law, they weren't given the right to go through, the due process of law, so getting a fair trial and all of that. And Amendment 6 was right to a speedy and public trial, and they weren't given a trial at all. And Amendment 8 was excessive and cruel punishment. And like you can see in these pictures, these were in the prisoner of war camps. They were pretty bad.
Alright, so what did President Lincoln prioritize more, the society or individual citizens? So President Lincoln suspended the act, suspended habeas corpus, because he was trying to support the Union society, and by suspending it, he would be able to detain Confederate soldiers without having them actually go to trial. And since the Union were detaining so many Confederates, it would have taken so long for each Confederate to go to trial. So while they were waiting for their trial, they could be walking free, and therefore there would be more Confederates on the field, and that could lead to maybe more deaths, and Union could push more soldiers. Also, when the Union detained these Confederates, the Confederates believed that this was just unfair, as you could probably guess, and that they shouldn't be here at all, and there was just a huge rebel against them.
Alright, so the two sides of the argument. On the left, it's the president had the right to suspend habeas corpus, and on the right, it's that they did not. So, in favor of the president is technically allowed to choose the best way to utilize his military to defend the government against invasion or rebellion. And also, Article 1, Section 9 of the Constitution says that the president is authorized to suspend habeas corpus if the public safety is in danger, which it kind of was, seeing as there was a civil war going on. And the president did not have the right. So the right should be given to Congress and not the president. That's the main one, and it also broke several amendments.
Alright, so what impact did this have on American citizens and how they viewed their government? Well, the Union citizens also rebelled against President Lincoln, because they thought, even though they strongly disliked the Confederates, they still have rights like us. Also, the suspension of the act made the Supreme Court very angry and aggravated, and one person in particular named John Merryman actually filed an appeal against President Lincoln about his decision, and it really never got to follow through.
Here's a quick video.
Right. Can you just click on it here?
Let's see. How should we?
Is it not? You can't click
Swipe
the
all the
link?
way to the right. Swipe your mouse
Here,
all the way
look
to
at
the
the
right.
screen on the TV.
Slide your cursor off the screen.
There you go.
There.
Hey, big guy.
And this video
Yes,
really
sir,
is
baby.
a good summary of the habeas corpus.
Well, as in all other wars, the Lincoln administration sometimes found civil liberties an inconvenience. Lincoln was much more careful and cautious about suspending basic civil liberties than some other wartime presidents have been in our history. But nonetheless, there were certainly violations of civil liberties during the Civil War. Habeas corpus, that is basically the right, if you're arrested, to have a charge lodged against you and to have a trial, was suspended a number of times during the war by the Lincoln administration. Suspending habeas corpus means you just round people up, put them in jail, and throw away the key, and that's it. Lincoln did that first in Maryland, right at the beginning of the war, but that was a military scene. There were riots in Maryland. There were people blowing up bridges to prevent Union troops from coming through Maryland to protect Washington, D.C. And Lincoln ordered the suspension of the writ of habeas corpus along the railroad line so that people who the military thought were saboteurs could just be rounded up. Later on, Lincoln will suspend the writ of habeas corpus throughout the whole North. Lincoln was cautious, but nonetheless, certainly there were people arrested who were not a danger to anybody, but who were critics of the administration. Probably the most famous case was Congressman Clement Vallandigham of Ohio, who after giving a fiery speech criticizing the Lincoln administration and the war in 1863, was arrested by General Burnside in Ohio. Lincoln didn't specifically order his arrest, but he defended it and justified it. Certain newspapers were suppressed temporarily in the North. The Chicago Times, for example, which criticized the administration strongly. Burnside, again, suppressed it. Lincoln eventually ordered that the Times be allowed to resume printing. There were arbitrary arrests in the North, but it's worth pointing out, of course, that generally speaking, the press was free. There were tremendous criticism of the Lincoln administration all through the war. Lincoln never considered suspending elections. Even in 1864, when at one point he thought he was really going to lose, he never thought of canceling the election in order to keep the war going. So, but there were violations. But what's different between Lincoln and some of our more recent presidents is that Lincoln discussed this intelligently and candidly in messages to Congress. He didn't just say, I have the right to do whatever I feel like because I'm the president. He said, or because we're at war, he said, look, here's our dilemma. We have these liberties. On the other hand, the exercise of some of these liberties is endangering the whole structure of government. Do we recognize every single liberty and let the government fall? Or do we violate one in order to save the government? Now, you know, there are different answers to that question, but Lincoln at least put it out there as a legitimate point of debate, whereas subsequent or more recent governments have basically just said, look, we're just going to arrest people we don't like, and that's tough, without any philosophical discussion of what this means in a democracy or in a system of the rule of law.
And then we just have to do the biography. Joey.
Well, whether in the slide you said whether it was justified, like you listed reasons of why it may have been legal or not legal, but do you think his actions, like he was right to do them or wrong to do them, not if it was legal or illegal, but do you think it was the right decision?
I mean, it really depends, like, which side you supported. Like, if you were part of the union,
No, but as from like our perspective.
our
So
perspective.
your personal perspective, I guess. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
I think to keep the country together, I think it was the right decision. But it also violated a bunch of amendments. So, I don't know, it's a hard, like,
Yeah.
decision, but, yeah.
Touching on that, like what he did by just detaining people, Confederates, was just people. It's like wrong, I guess, and not following the amendments that was made for this country to abide by, and but also he kind of saved our country in a way, because by detaining all these Confederates, I'm not sure what the number is, but by detaining all these Confederates,
They might have, like, done something and then South could have seceded, maybe.
yeah.
But
Any other questions?
So you think it was necessary, or maybe not necessary, but it was,
It could have been the right decision.
yeah, like it could have prevented, it
Yeah.
probably prevented the South from winning.
Yeah, it could have.
but we're not really, like, 100% sure. Like,
Yeah. 'cause it was
something
2 years ago.
might have happened differently, but
Thank you.